Have you ever wondered why your blood sugar numbers can be stubborn even when you're eating carefully, walking every day, and doing everything your doctor told you to do years ago? There's a piece of this puzzle that almost nobody talks about, and it has nothing to do with sugar, carbs, or exercise. It has to do with 3 tiny minerals hiding in your everyday food. Minerals that your body needs in very small amounts, but without them, your cells may struggle to use the insulin you're already making. If you're over 55, this matters more than you might think, because as we age, our bodies naturally become less efficient at holding on to these minerals. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which 3 minerals researchers have linked to healthier blood sugar, why they matter so much for people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, and simple ways to make sure you're getting enough of them without turning your kitchen upside down. Stay with me, because the 3rd mineral on this list is the one most people have never even heard of, and it might be the missing piece for a lot of us. Let's talk for a moment about why this topic deserves your attention, especially if you've crossed into your 50s, 60s, or 70s. Blood sugar management becomes trickier as we age, for a few honest reasons. Our muscles, which are major users of blood sugar, tend to shrink a little each year, unless we work to maintain them. Our pancreas, the organ that makes insulin, can slow down its response over time. And many of us are taking medications for blood pressure, cholesterol, or other conditions that can quietly affect how our bodies handle sugar and minerals. On top of all that, our digestive systems become slightly less efficient at absorbing nutrients from food, which means even a balanced diet might not deliver everything our cells need. This isn't meant to alarm you. It's meant to explain why paying closer attention to a few key minerals can be such a smart, low-effort strategy for supporting healthy blood sugar as the decades add up. Think of it less like a medical emergency and more like quietly tuning up a car that's been running for a long time. A few small adjustments can make a real difference in how smoothly things run. Now, before we get into the minerals themselves, I want to be upfront with you. None of what you're about to hear is a cure, a miracle, or a replacement for anything your doctor has prescribed. What you're about to hear is about giving your body the raw materials it needs to do its job a little better. Think of insulin as a key, and your cells as locked doors. Even a perfect key struggles to open a rusty stuck lock. These minerals are like the oil that helps that lock turn smoothly. With that in mind, let's start with the first mineral, and honestly, it might be the most underappreciated nutrient in the entire conversation about healthy aging. The first mineral is magnesium. If you've heard of magnesium before, you probably associate it with muscle cramps or sleep, but magnesium plays a much bigger role than most people realize when it comes to blood sugar. Here's the simple science behind it. Magnesium is involved in more than 300 processes in your body, and one of the most important is helping insulin do its job. When insulin arrives at a cell, it needs magnesium to help activate the pathway that lets sugar move from your bloodstream into the cell for energy. Without enough magnesium, that pathway can become sluggish, almost like a door that's been painted shut. Sugar stays in the blood longer than it should, even if your pancreas made plenty of insulin. Here's where it gets interesting for those of us getting a little older. Studies looking at older adults have consistently found that people with lower magnesium levels tend to have a harder time keeping blood sugar steady, and this connection becomes even more noticeable after age 60. Part of the reason is that our kidneys, as we age, become less efficient at holding on to magnesium, so more of it slips out through urine than it used to. Combine that with the fact that many common medications, including some diuretics used for blood pressure, can further deplete magnesium. And you can see why this mineral quietly becomes harder to maintain the older we get. Let me give you a relatable scenario. Imagine you're trying to unlock your front door, but the key is a little rusty. It still works, but you have to jiggle it, push harder, and it takes longer than it should. That's a bit like what happens inside your cells when magnesium is low. Insulin is still there, still trying to do its job, but the process is inefficient. Over time, that inefficiency can contribute to blood sugar numbers that stay a bit higher than they should be, even when you're doing many things right. So what can you actually do about this? The good news is that magnesium is found in foods many of us already enjoy. Leafy green vegetables like spinach and Swiss chard are excellent sources. So are nuts, particularly almonds and cashews. Pumpkin seeds are one of the richest natural sources of magnesium you can find, and a small handful makes an easy snack. Whole grains like brown rice and oats also contribute a meaningful amount. And if you enjoy a small square of dark chocolate now and then, you'll be glad to know it actually contains a respectable amount of magnesium too. If you're someone who has been told by a doctor that your magnesium levels run low, or if you experience frequent muscle cramps, unusual fatigue, or trouble sleeping, it may be worth having a simple conversation with your healthcare provider about whether a supplement makes sense for your specific situation. This isn't something to decide on your own, especially if you take medications for your heart or kidneys, because magnesium can interact with certain prescriptions. But for most people, simply shifting a few meals each week to include more magnesium-rich foods is a safe, gentle way to support this important mineral. Now, before we move to the second mineral, I want to mention something that surprises a lot of viewers. There's a common mistake many people make when trying to boost their magnesium, and it has to do with how they cook their vegetables. Boiling leafy greens for a long time can cause a significant portion of the magnesium to leach out into the cooking water. If you steam your vegetables instead or cook them quickly in a small amount of water, you preserve much more of this valuable mineral. It's a small change, but it makes a real difference over weeks and months of consistent eating. Let's move on to the second mineral, and this one has a much longer history in the conversation about blood sugar, though it's often misunderstood. This mineral is chromium. You may have seen chromium mentioned on supplement bottles at the pharmacy, sometimes marketed with bold claims. We're going to set aside the marketing and focus on what the actual science tells us. Chromium's role in the body is fascinating. It appears to help insulin bind more effectively to receptors on the surface of your cells. Think of insulin receptors as little docking stations and chromium as something like a helper that makes the docking process smoother and more reliable. When chromium levels are adequate, insulin seems to work more efficiently, which can help sugar move out of the bloodstream and into cells where it belongs. When chromium is lacking, that docking process can become less effective, meaning insulin has to work harder to achieve the same result. Research on chromium has been somewhat mixed over the years, and it's important to be honest about that. Some studies show meaningful benefits for blood sugar regulation, particularly in people who had lower chromium levels to begin with, while other studies show more modest effects. What most researchers agree on, however, is that chromium deficiency, while uncommon in a severe form, can still occur at milder levels, especially among older adults, and especially among people who eat a lot of highly processed foods, since refined sugars and processed grains are known to reduce chromium levels in the body over time. Here's a relatable way to think about it. Imagine chromium as a translator standing between insulin and your cells, helping them communicate more clearly. If the translator is doing a great job, the conversation goes smoothly. If the translator is a little rusty or missing altogether, some messages might get lost and your cells might not respond to insulin's message quite as quickly as they should. So where can you find chromium naturally? Broccoli is one of the best sources, and a single cup provides a meaningful amount. Whole grains again make an appearance here, along with green beans, and even everyday items like potatoes with the skin left on. Lean meats, particularly turkey and chicken, also contain useful amounts of chromium. One interesting note is that chromium content in food can vary quite a bit depending on the soil it was grown in, which is part of why researchers have had a harder time pinning down exact daily needs. I do want to give you an important warning here, because this is where many people get confused. High-dose chromium supplements, especially chromium sold in large doses at some stores, are not something you should start taking on your own, particularly if you already take medication for diabetes or blood sugar. Combining certain supplements with prescription medication can occasionally cause blood sugar to drop too low, which is its own kind of dangerous. If you're curious about whether a chromium supplement could help your specific situation, that conversation belongs with your doctor or pharmacist, not with a bottle on a store shelf. Getting chromium through whole foods, on the other hand, is simply a smart and safe habit for almost everyone. Now here comes the mineral that most people watching this have probably never heard mentioned in the context of blood sugar at all. This is the one I promised you earlier, and I think you'll find it genuinely surprising. The third mineral is zinc. Most of us think of zinc, if we think of it at all, as something related to immune health or wound healing. But zinc has a quiet, powerful relationship with your pancreas that deserves far more attention than it usually gets. Here's why. Your pancreas doesn't just make insulin, it also has to store it properly before releasing it into your bloodstream at exactly the right moment. Zinc is essential for that storage process. In fact, insulin is actually held inside special storage granules in the pancreas, and zinc is a required building block for those granules to form and function correctly. Without enough zinc, insulin can be harder to store properly and release efficiently when your body needs it. There's another layer to this story that researchers have found particularly interesting. Zinc also appears to help protect the very cells in your pancreas that produce insulin, the beta cells, from a type of everyday wear and tear called oxidative stress. You can think of oxidative stress like slow rusting on the inside of your body, caused by natural byproducts of everyday metabolism. Over many years, this kind of wear and tear can add up. Zinc seems to act like a protective coating, helping to shield these hardworking cells from some of that damage. This becomes especially relevant for those of us in our 60s, 70s, and 80s, since these protective mechanisms tend to become less robust with age, right at the time when we need them most. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine your pancreas's beta cells has a small dedicated factory that has been running non-stop for 60 or 70 years, producing insulin day after day without ever taking a vacation. Just like any factory that runs for decades, a little maintenance and protection can go a long way toward keeping it running smoothly for years to come. Zinc appears to be part of that maintenance crew. So where do we find zinc in everyday food? Shellfish, particularly oysters, are famous for having the highest zinc content of any food, though. I understand that's not a weekly meal for most of us. More practical sources for everyday eating include beef, pork, and chicken, as well as beans, chickpeas, and lentils, for those who prefer more plant-based meals. Pumpkin seeds make a second appearance on this list, which is a nice bit of overlap with magnesium, meaning a simple handful of pumpkin seeds is doing double duty for your health. Dairy products like cheese and yogurt also contain useful amounts of zinc, along with fortified cereals, if you check the label. Here's something worth knowing, especially for anyone following a mostly plant-based diet. Certain compounds found in beans, whole grains, and some vegetables called phytates can slightly reduce how much zinc your body actually absorbs from a meal. This doesn't mean you should avoid these healthy foods at all. It simply means that soaking beans before cooking or choosing sprouted grain products when available can modestly improve how much zinc your body is able to use. It's a small detail, but the kind of small detail that adds up nicely over time. Now let's step back for a moment and talk about how these three minerals work together, because that's really the heart of what makes this topic so worth understanding. Magnesium helps insulin activate the pathway that lets sugar enter your cells. Chromium helps insulin bind more effectively to its receptors in the first place. And zinc helps your pancreas properly store and protect the very insulin that starts this whole process. When you put those three roles together, you can see they're not competing ideas. They're three different steps in the very same relay race. And if any one of the three runners is running slower than it should, the whole team feels it. This is why focusing on just one of these minerals in isolation often produces underwhelming results in research studies, while a more balanced whole food approach tends to show more consistent benefits. It's not about finding one miracle mineral. It's about supporting the entire system your body relies on day in and day out to keep your blood sugar in a healthy, steady range. Let's talk about practical advice now, because understanding the science is only half the story. What can you actually do this week to start supporting these three minerals in your daily life? The good news is that you don't need to overhaul your entire diet or buy anything expensive or exotic. A simple realistic goal is to try to include at least one magnesium-rich food, one chromium-rich food, and one zinc-rich food in your meals most days of the week. That might look like a handful of pumpkin seeds as a snack, which covers both magnesium and zinc at once, a serving of steamed broccoli with dinner for chromium, and perhaps beans or lean meat worked into a soup or main dish for zinc. Cooking method matters too, as we talked about earlier. Gentle cooking methods like steaming, roasting, or quick sautéing tend to preserve more minerals than long boiling, and variety matters more than perfection. You don't need to eat the exact same superfood every single day. Rotating through different vegetables, grains, seeds, and proteins throughout the week naturally provides a broader range of minerals than eating the same handful of foods on repeat. If you take medications regularly, whether for blood pressure, heart health, or diabetes itself, it's worth having a simple conversation at your next appointment about whether your current prescriptions might be affecting your mineral levels. This isn't about second-guessing your doctor, it's about giving them a complete picture so they can help you make the best decisions for your specific health situation. Blood tests can check your levels of magnesium and zinc fairly easily, if there's ever a concern giving you real data instead of guesswork. And if you ever notice symptoms like persistent muscle cramps, unusual fatigue, slow healing of cuts or scrapes, or blood sugar numbers that don't seem to respond the way you'd expect despite your best efforts, please don't try to self-diagnose a mineral deficiency at home. These symptoms can have many different causes, and the right next step is always a conversation with a qualified healthcare professional who knows your full medical history. Think of everything in this video as a foundation of knowledge to bring into that conversation, not a replacement for it. As we wrap up, let's quickly recap the key points, because I know we've covered a lot of ground together. Magnesium helps insulin unlock the door that lets sugar move into your cells, and it's found generously in leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. Chromium helps insulin communicate more clearly with your cell's receptors, and you can find it in broccoli, whole grains, and lean meats. And zinc helps your pancreas properly store and protect the insulin it produces, with great sources including seeds, beans, and lean proteins. Together, these three minerals support different parts of the very same process, and giving your body a steady, reliable supply of all three through simple everyday food choices is one of the most realistic and sustainable ways to support healthy blood sugar as you move through your 60s, 70s, and beyond. I hope this video left you feeling a little more informed and, honestly, a little more empowered about something as simple as what's already sitting in your grocery store. Small, consistent choices made over months and years tend to add up to far more than any single dramatic change ever could. That's really the quiet secret behind healthy aging. Before you go, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Which of these 3 minerals surprised you the most? Was it magnesium, chromium, or zinc? Drop a comment and let me know, and if you feel comfortable sharing, tell us your age or where you're watching from today. It's always wonderful to see just how many different corners of the world are represented in this community. And if you know a friend or family member who might benefit from hearing this, consider sharing this video with them. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.